The orchestra faltered. A single violin screeched into silence as every head in the Harrington ballroom turned. Miss Isabel Fairmont had just slapped the most powerful duke in England. The echo of the strike hung beneath the chandeliers like a scandal waiting to explode. Gasps rippled through silk and satin. Fan handles snapped open. Whispers ignited. And the Duke of Harrington did not move. He simply stood there before her, tall and immovable, blue eyes colder than the marble columns surrounding them. "Explain yourself, Miss Fairmont." His voice was quiet, but the entire ballroom heard it. Isabel lifted her chin. She knew exactly what this moment meant. A governess humiliating a duke before half of London's aristocracy. There were consequences for such things, consequences that ruined lives. But she refused to retreat. "You insulted my father, Your Grace." A murmur surged through the crowd. The duke's gaze sharpened. "I stated a documented fact." "No," Isabel replied steadily. "You repeated a lie." The duke's expression hardened. Behind him stood half the most powerful men in England, lords, generals, ministers, men who had built their lives around reputation and silence. And Isabel Fairmont had just shattered both. Lady Harrington appeared at Isabel's side, pale with fury. "Miss Fairmont," she hissed, "you will apologize immediately." But Isabel did not look at her. Her gaze remained fixed on the duke. For a long moment he studied her, really studied her, not the plain wool gown, not the modest governess posture, but the defiance blazing in those green eyes. He had expected fear. He found none. The Duke of Harrington slowly set down his glass of champagne. "Leave us." The command was calm, absolute. The musicians lowered their instruments. Guests drifted backward, pretending politeness while straining to hear every word. Only Lady Harrington remained. "My brother is not accustomed to—" "Charlotte's governess may stay," the Duke interrupted coolly. Lady Harrington fell silent. The Duke stepped closer. Isabel suddenly became aware of the height of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the quiet, dangerous power of a man who commanded governments as easily as servants. "You accuse me of repeating a lie," he said softly. "Yes. You believe Thomas Fairmont was innocent?" "I know he was." Another wave of whispers moved through the ballroom. The Duke's jaw tightened. Thomas Fairmont, the disgraced mathematician who had died under accusations of fraud 5 years earlier. A scandal the East India Company had buried quickly, and yet here stood his daughter, slapping dukes and challenging history. "You are very certain for a woman who was barely 20 when the investigation concluded." "I am certain," Isabel replied, "because my father taught me how to read patterns." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Patterns?" "Yes." She stepped toward him now, courage burning through her fear. The accusations against him were mathematically impossible. That caught his attention. She saw it. A flicker. The Duke of Harrington was not a man who reacted to gossip, but logic he respected. "What do you mean?" Isabel lowered her voice. "Your Grace oversaw the East India audit in 1819. The ballroom quieted further. The signatures condemning my father appear identical across every document. So? No man signs his name identically dozens of times. A pause. It is mechanically impossible. The Duke stared at her. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked intrigued. "You believe the signatures were forged?" "I know they were." "An extraordinary accusation. And yet you repeated it tonight as if it were fact." Silence spread across the ballroom. The Duke leaned slightly closer. "So your solution was to slap me. You insulted my father." His gaze dropped briefly to her hand, the same hand that had struck him. Then he surprised her. He laughed, softly, low enough that only she heard it. "My God." His eyes returned to hers. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" "Most people are. I'm not most people." Something dangerous flickered across his expression. Interest. Slowly, deliberately, the Duke turned toward the guests who pretended not to watch. "The matter appears unresolved." His voice carried easily across the ballroom. "Which means it deserves investigation." Shock rippled through the crowd. Lady Harrington nearly fainted. The Duke looked back at Isabel. "Miss Fairmont." "Yes, Your Grace?" "If you are correct." His voice lowered again. "Then someone manipulated official records inside the Crown's own system." "That is exactly what I believe." "And if you are wrong?" She did not hesitate. "Then you may ruin me publicly." A long silence followed. The Duke studied her as though solving a puzzle. Finally he said, "Come to my library tomorrow night." Isabel froze. "Your Grace?" "You claim to understand patterns." He stepped aside slightly. "As it happens," his voice softened, The crown has several messages that require deciphering. A ripple of astonishment swept through the room. Prove your theory, the Duke continued. And if you succeed, his eyes locked onto hers, I will personally reopen your father's case. Isabel's heart slammed against her ribs. The ballroom felt suddenly too small, too warm. Do we have an agreement, Miss Fairmont? She looked at him, at the man she had just publicly humiliated, the man feared by half of England. And yet, something in his gaze was not anger. It was curiosity, dangerous curiosity. Very well, she said quietly. The Duke's mouth curved slightly. Excellent. He lifted his champagne again. Now, he announced smoothly to the ballroom. Let us continue dancing. Music resumed. Conversations erupted. Scandal bloomed like wildfire. And Isabel Fairmont realized something far more dangerous than humiliation had just begun. She had challenged the most powerful Duke in England. And somehow, he had invited her into his secrets. London did not forgive scandals easily. By the following morning, every drawing room in Mayfair whispered the same story. A governess, a slap, and the Duke of Harrington smiling afterward. Isabel felt those whispers long before she heard them. The Harrington breakfast room had never felt colder. Lady Harrington poured her tea with sharp, deliberate movements. Charlotte, thankfully oblivious to society's cruelty, continued arranging pressed flowers across the table. But the tension in the room was unmistakable. You have created an extraordinary embarrassment for this household, Miss Fairmont. Lady Harrington's voice was quiet. Too quiet. Isabel folded her hands in her lap. I defended my father. You assaulted my brother. He insulted a dead man. Lady Harrington's eyes flashed. You forget your position. Isabel did not answer. She knew her position perfectly. A governess without fortune, without family influence, a woman society could discard with a single whisper. And yet, the Duke had not dismissed her. He had invited her to his library. That thought lingered in her mind all morning like a dangerous promise. Charlotte suddenly looked up. Miss Fairmont? Yes, my lady? Are you going to the library tonight? Lady Harrington stiffened. Charlotte. But the girl smiled innocently. Uncle William said she must come. The teacup in Lady Harrington's hand stopped halfway to the table. He said that? Charlotte nodded cheerfully. He told the butler to prepare the west corridor after dinner. A long silence followed. Lady Harrington slowly turned toward Isabel. You will attend. The words sounded more like a command than permission. I beg your pardon. My brother rarely changes his mind once a decision is made. Her gaze sharpened, and when he becomes interested in something, she paused. It is rarely safe for the object of that interest. Isabel held her stare. I am not afraid of the Duke. That, Lady Harrington said quietly, is precisely the problem. Night fell slowly over Harrington House. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows. The corridors had grown silent. Servants retired. Candles burned low, and Isabel Fairmont stood outside the forbidden door. The Duke's library. Every servant in the house knew the rule. No one entered without permission. No one. Yet the door stood slightly open. Light spilled across the marble floor. Her pulse quickened. For a moment she hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The library was larger than she imagined. Floor-to-ceiling shelves wrapped the room in dark mahogany. Maps covered one wall. A massive desk stood beside the fireplace. And near the window, the Duke of Harrington waited. He was not dressed for society tonight. No ceremonial coat, no jeweled orders, only a dark waistcoat and loose cravat. The absence of formality made him look younger, more dangerous. You're punctual. His voice broke the silence. I dislike wasting time, Your Grace. He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the desk. Come here. 3 sheets of paper lay beneath the candlelight, each covered in strange symbols. Codes. Isabel felt a small spark of recognition. You intercepted these? The Duke raised an eyebrow. You recognized them immediately. They're substitution ciphers. She stepped closer. Her fingers hovered above the parchment. The key rotates every few characters. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting? She scanned the first line. Her mind began moving instinctively. Patterns, repetitions, structure hidden beneath chaos. French ports, she murmured. His gaze sharpened. You can read it already? Partially. She reached for the pen beside the papers. Without asking permission, the Duke did not stop her. The room filled with silence except for the scratch of ink. Minutes passed. Then Isabel froze. Her eyes widened. What is it? These aren't merchant codes. She slowly turned the paper toward him. They're military movements. His expression darkened. Continue. She translated the final line, then set the pen down. Troop shipments from Calais, she said quietly. Scheduled for next month. The Duke stared at the page. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly. Good God. He looked at her again, but now there was no trace of amusement, only calculation. You solved this in 15 minutes. My father taught me. Thomas Fairmont. Yes. The Duke leaned back against the desk. And you still believe he was framed? I know he was. Another silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly. Finally he said, if you are correct, someone inside the East India Company falsified official documents. Yes. And if that someone still holds influence, then they are still doing it. The Duke's eyes gleamed. For the first time that evening, he looked pleased. Miss Fairmont, he said quietly, how would you like to help me expose them? Her breath caught. You mean, work for you? For the Crown. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of the fire behind him. There are messages we cannot decode, he continued. Patterns we cannot see. His voice lowered. But you can? Isabel hesitated. Every instinct warned her. This was not merely scholarship. It was espionage, danger, politics. But it was also something else. The chance to clear her father's name. What would you require of me? Discretion. That I already possess. And courage. She met his gaze. You already know I have that. A slow smile appeared on the Duke's lips. Yes. Yes, I do. He extended his hand. Then welcome to a very dangerous game, Miss Fairmont. For a moment Isabel stared at his hand. Then she placed her fingers in his. The touch was brief, formal, yet something electric passed between them. The Duke released her slowly. One more thing. Yes, Your Grace? You should know. His voice softened. You are the first woman who has ever struck me. Isabel lifted her chin. Do you intend to hold it against me? He watched her for a long moment, then said quietly, no. A pause. If anything, the corner of his mouth curved. I suspect I may never forget it. London adored a scandal. Within days of the ballroom incident, whispers about Miss Fairmont followed every carriage and dinner invitation in Mayfair. Some called her reckless. Others called her foolish. But what fascinated society most was not the slap itself. It was the Duke's reaction. The Duke of Harrington had done nothing. No dismissal. No humiliation. No quiet removal from the household. Instead, he had been seen twice speaking with the governess in his own library. That alone made half of London restless. 3 nights after their first meeting, Isabel returned to the library. The household slept. Rain whispered against the tall windows. She slipped through the corridor silently, the hem of her dark cloak brushing the marble floor. Inside, the Duke was already waiting. Tonight, the desk was covered with papers, letters, codes, maps. You are late, he said without looking up. By 2 minutes. That is still late. Isabel removed her gloves. Your clock runs fast. He glanced up at that. The faintest hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. Confident as ever. Accurate as ever. She stepped toward the desk. What are we deciphering tonight? The Duke slid a sealed envelope toward her. This arrived from Lisbon yesterday. Isabel opened it carefully. Her eyes moved quickly across the strange symbols. Visionaire cipher, she murmured. The Duke watched her closely. You recognized it immediately. It's a common diplomatic method. She paused. But the key is unusual. How so? The rotation changes every 7 characters. He folded his arms. And? She reached for the pen. Give me 10 minutes. The room fell silent. Firelight flickered across the walls. The only sound was the quiet scratch of ink. The Duke studied her while she worked. Most women in London were trained for politeness, charm, and graceful silence. Isabel Fairmont possessed none of those qualities. She frowned while thinking, tapped the pen against her lip, muttered calculations under her breath. She behaved like a mathematician, not a lady. It was unexpectedly fascinating. After several minutes, she stopped writing. Done. The Duke stepped closer. What does it say? Portuguese fleet movements. His expression sharpened. She pointed to the translation. They're coordinating with French vessels near Cadiz. That shouldn't be possible. It is if someone inside the British trade network is leaking schedules. The Duke's gaze darkened. Someone powerful. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Then he said quietly, You realize what this means? Yes. You are now involved in matters of state. I assumed that already. You could be questioned. I expected that. You could become a target. At that, she finally looked up. Your Grace. Yes? I have already been ruined by society once. Her voice was calm. I have very little left to lose. Something in that answer shifted the atmosphere. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You are either very brave," he stepped closer, "or dangerously stubborn." "Both." His mouth almost smiled. Hours later, the final code was complete. Isabel stretched slightly, rubbing her fingers. "You work like a soldier," the Duke observed. "Patterns do not wait politely. You've done this before." "Yes." "With your father?" She nodded.
He taught me mathematics when I was 12.
"And espionage?" "No." She met his gaze. "Only truth." The Duke looked at the translated papers again. Then back at her. "You still believe the documents condemning him were forged?" "I know they were." "And if we discover otherwise?" Her voice did not waver. "Then I will accept the truth." A pause. The Duke walked slowly toward the window. Rain streaked the glass outside. "You understand," he said quietly, "that exposing the wrong man could destroy powerful families. Justice often does." He turned back. "And if that family were mine?" The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. Isabel's breath caught slightly. "Is there reason to suspect that?" The Duke did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face, her courage, her stubborn refusal to bend. Then he said softly, "I am asking whether your loyalty to the truth is greater than your fear of me." She held his gaze. "My loyalty to the truth is greater than my fear of anyone." Another long silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. The Duke laughed, not the polite aristocratic chuckle used in drawing rooms. A real laugh, low, quiet, almost surprised. "God help the man who tries to lie to you, Miss Fairmont." "Many already have." "Yes." He looked at her carefully. "I suspect that is about to change." Their eyes held. Too long. The fire crackled softly behind them. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Until... A sudden knock struck the library door. Both turned. The Duke's expression hardened instantly. "Enter." The door opened. Lady Harrington stepped inside. Her sharp eyes moved from her brother to Isabel, then to the scattered code sheets across the desk. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice cut through the room like ice. "William." The Duke straightened. "Yes?" "You are working with my governess." It was not a question. His answer was calm. "Yes." Lady Harrington's gaze moved slowly to Isabel. "You may leave us, Miss Fairmont." But before Isabel could move, the Duke spoke. "No." The word echoed through the library. London society did not require proof to destroy a woman. Whispers were enough. Within 2 days of Lady Harrington's discovery, the rumors began to spread through Mayfair drawing rooms like perfume drifting through silk curtains. A governess visiting the Duke's private library at night, repeatedly. Some called it scandal. Others called it seduction. By the end of the week, the story had grown far uglier, and Isabel knew exactly who had started it. Lady Harrington. The tension reached its peak at the Harrington Spring Ball. Crystal chandeliers flooded the grand ballroom with golden light. Violins floated through the air. Ladies in shimmering gowns glided across polished marble floors. And Isabel Fairmont stood alone near the wall, invisible again. But this time the invisibility felt different. Now the whispers followed her. "Is that the governess? The one from the scandal? They say the Duke keeps her in his library at night." How improper. Isabel kept her gaze calm, her spine straight. She had endured worse humiliations before, but the cruelty still burned. Across the ballroom, the Duke of Harrington stood surrounded by diplomats and generals. Tall, impeccably, untouchable. Every woman in the room watched him. Every man listened when he spoke. He looked exactly as London expected him to look. Cold, controlled, unreachable. Yet suddenly, his eyes lifted and found hers. For one suspended moment, the ballroom vanished. He missed a step in the conversation. One of the ministers frowned. But the Duke recovered instantly. The mask returned. The Duke of Harrington never showed weakness in public. Never. Still, a few minutes later he excused himself and disappeared toward the terrace. Isabel should have ignored it. She should have remained inside, safe among polite lies and controlled smiles. But something inside her refused. Her feet moved before reason could stop them. The terrace door stood half open. Cool night air drifted inside. Moonlight washed across pale stone columns and climbing ivy. And the Duke stood alone beside the balustrade, his back to her, hands resting on the marble. "You may come out, Miss Fairmont." Her breath caught. "I know you're there." She stepped forward slowly. "I did not intend to follow you. Yet here you are." He turned. The silver light softened the severity of his face. "You should return to the ballroom." "I will." A pause. In a moment, silence stretched between them. The distant music floated through the open doors. "You should not have come tonight," he said quietly. "My position requires it." "And the rumors?" She lifted her chin. "I have lived with worse." His jaw tightened. "That does not make them acceptable." "They are inevitable." Another silence followed. The Duke studied her carefully. "You heard them?" "Yes." "And yet you remain." "I will not hide because society dislikes the truth." Something in that answer stirred something dangerous in his expression. "You are remarkably stubborn." "You've said that before?" "Yes." He stepped closer. Too close. "You realize what my sister is doing?" "Yes." "She intends to force me to dismiss you." "Then you should." The word surprised him. "You want to leave?" "No." Her voice softened slightly. "But I will not be the reason your reputation suffers." The Duke stared at her. "Miss Fairmont." "Yes?" "My reputation survived wars." His gaze darkened slightly. "I doubt a governess could destroy it." Despite the tension, Isabel almost smiled. But then another voice cut through the night. "Dominic." Both turned. A woman stepped onto the terrace. Lady Victoria Lennox. Her emerald gown shimmered beneath the lantern light. Beautiful. Elegant. Perfectly suited to aristocratic life. She stopped when she saw Isabel. "Oh." The word carried quiet judgment. Dominic's expression hardened slightly. "Victoria, I wondered where you had vanished." Her eyes moved slowly between them. "Am I interrupting something?" "Nothing of consequence," Dominic replied calmly. Victoria's smile was polite. Too polite. "My father mentioned your mother wishes us to dine together tomorrow." Dominic did not answer immediately. Victoria's gaze lingered on Isabel. "A private dinner." The implication hung heavily in the air. Future engagement? Society had already decided. Dominic and Victoria Lennox were inevitable. Isabel felt the quiet sting of something she refused to name. "I should return inside," she said softly. She moved toward the doors, but Dominic's voice stopped her. "Miss Fairmont." She turned. "Yes?" His expression had changed again. Serious, almost troubled. "Do not believe everything London says." Victoria's smile thinned. "And what exactly is London saying?" she asked sweetly. Dominic did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Isabel. "That Miss Fairmont is far more dangerous than she appears." Isabel held his gaze. "Dangerous to whom?" His answer came softly. "To any man foolish enough to underestimate her." Their eyes locked for a moment. Then Isabel turned and returned to the ballroom. But behind her, Victoria studied Dominic carefully. "You're distracted tonight." "Am I?" "Yes." Her voice softened. "You rarely notice governesses." Dominic looked out across the dark gardens. "You're right. And yet this one seems to interest you." He said nothing. Victoria stepped closer. "Be careful, Dominic." Her tone carried quiet warning. "London forgives a duke many sins." She glanced toward the ballroom doors. "But not if he ruins himself for a woman beneath his station." Dominic's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, his voice held steel. "Miss Fairmont is beneath no one." Victoria's eyes widened slightly. The silence that followed said everything, and somewhere deep in Dominic's mind, a dangerous realization began forming. The game had changed, and he might already be losing it. The rain began before dawn. Thin silver lines streaked the tall windows of the Duke's private library while London still slept beneath its gray sky. Dominic Carstairs had not slept. The terrace conversation replayed endlessly in his mind. Victoria's warning, Isabel's quiet dignity, and the moment when he had defended her without hesitation. That alone would feed gossip for weeks. He poured another glass of brandy but did not drink it. Instead, he stared at the empty chair across the desk. The chair where Isabel usually sat. The chair that had remained empty for 3 nights. She had not returned. No explanation. No note. Nothing. And Dominic hated the silence far more than scandal. Meanwhile, across London in Bloomsbury, Isabel Fairmont sat beside a narrow window in a modest townhouse. Her Aunt Margaret moved quietly in the small kitchen behind her. The house smelled of bread and tea, a peaceful smell, a safe smell, but Isabel's thoughts refused to calm. The folder lay open on the table. Inside it, copies of the East India Company records Dominic had once allowed her to examine. She had not meant to look again, yet curiosity had betrayed her. Again. Her fingers trembled slightly as her eyes returned to the signature. Henry Carstairs. Dominic's father. The name repeated again and again beneath the accusations against Thomas Fairmont. Her father. Each signature looked identical. Perfect. Too perfect. Forgery. Her mind knew that now, but her heart had not yet caught up. Because even if Dominic's father had been innocent, the man responsible still belonged to the same world, the same powerful system that had destroyed her family. And Dominic himself. Dominic had offered to sacrifice everything for justice, even his own name. The memory made her chest tighten painfully. A knock on the door shattered the silence. Aunt Margaret entered the room. "My dear," she said gently, "there is a gentleman asking for you." Isabel's breath caught. "His name?" "Viscount Carstairs." Her heart stumbled. "He looks rather determined," her aunt added carefully. Isabel closed the folder. "I will see him." Dominic stood in the small parlor like a man who had stepped into a different world. The room was modest, simple furniture, books stacked everywhere, fresh flowers in a ceramic vase, a quiet home, the sort of place London's aristocracy rarely noticed. When Isabel entered, he turned instantly. For a moment, neither spoke. She looked different here, less guarded, less distant, and somehow more beautiful. "You found me quickly," she said. "I had help." "From the Duke?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. Silence settled between them. Finally he spoke. "You stopped coming?" "Yes." "Why?" Isabel hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because it became dangerous." "For whom?" "For both of us." Dominic stepped closer. "You believe my father ruined yours?" "I saw the documents." "And yet you did not allow me to explain." "Because there is nothing you could say that would change the truth." He shook his head slowly. "No." His voice lowered. "You are wrong." Isabel frowned. "What do you mean?" Dominic reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the table. "The Duke investigated the signatures." Her heart raced. "And?" "They were forged." The words hung in the air. Isabel stared at him. "Forged?" "Yes. The handwriting patterns are identical across dozens of documents." Her breath quickened. "That proves imitation." "Exactly." Dominic stepped closer again. "My father was not the man who destroyed yours." "Then who was?" "Sir Edmund Graves." The name struck her like a blow. "The undersecretary?" "He handled the original audit records." Isabel's mind raced. Pieces began sliding into place. Graves had access, authority, time. "But we need proof," Dominic continued. "Real proof. And you believe I can find it?" "Yes." Silence filled the room. Then Isabel asked quietly, "Why?" Dominic did not hesitate. "Because you see patterns no one else notices." "That is not the real reason." He met her gaze. "You're right." A pause. "The real reason is that I trust you." The words landed softly between them. Too softly, dangerously softly. Isabel looked away. "Trust is a fragile thing." "Yes. I almost destroyed yours." "No." Dominic's voice was steady. "You protected yourself." She looked back at him. "And what about you? What about me?" "You were willing to lose everything." His answer came quietly. "I still am." Their eyes held. Too long, too close. Finally, Isabel whispered, "Dominic, if we pursue this—" "I know. It could ruin you." "Yes. And yet you came here anyway." A faint smile touched his lips. "Yes." The silence between them shifted, warmer, more dangerous. Then Aunt Margaret's voice floated from the kitchen. "Tea is ready." Both stepped apart instinctively. Dominic cleared his throat. "Your aunt seems attentive." Isabel almost laughed. "She is protecting my reputation." "As she should." Dominic reached for his gloves. "I will return tomorrow with the Duke." "Why?" "Because if Sir Edmund Graves forged those documents." His eyes darkened slightly. "Then he has been hiding crimes for years." Isabel felt the weight of the truth settling. "And you intend to expose him?" "Yes." He paused at the door. "But I will not do it without you." She studied him carefully. "You trust me with that responsibility?" "Yes." "And with your future?" Another pause. "Also yes." For a moment Isabel did not breathe. Then she said quietly, "Very well." Dominic's expression softened. "I knew you would say that." He opened the door, but before leaving he turned once more. "Miss Fairmont." "Yes?" "You should know something." "What?" A small smile touched his lips. "I have never been so thoroughly defeated by a governess." Isabel's cheeks warmed. "And you should know something as well, Viscount." "And what is that?" She met his gaze. "I suspect you have not lost yet." Dominic laughed softly. Then he stepped into the afternoon sunlight, leaving Isabel standing in the doorway, wondering if the greatest danger between them was no longer scandal, but something far more complicated. The following morning dawned gray and restless over London. Isabel had barely slept. Every hour of the night had been filled with the same thoughts. Forged signatures, Sir Edmund Graves, and Dominic's quiet promise. I trust you. No one had said those words to her in years. Trust had been a luxury lost the day her father's name was destroyed. Yet now everything depended on it. By mid-morning, the Duke of Harrington's carriage arrived outside Aunt Margaret's townhouse. The arrival alone caused half the street to peer through their curtains. Dukes did not visit Bloomsbury Cottages. Isabel stepped outside to meet them. Dominic stood beside the carriage. The Duke remained seated inside, expression composed and unreadable. Miss Fairmont, the Duke said coolly as she approached. Your Grace, shall we? She entered the carriage without another word. The ride to Harrington House passed in tense silence. Dominic watched her carefully. You look exhausted. I was working. On the signatures? Yes. And? Her gaze lifted. They are definitely forged. The Duke leaned forward slightly. Explain. Isabel reached into her satchel and removed several papers. I copied the original signatures attributed to Henry Carstairs. She placed them beside newer ministry documents. The angle of the capital H is identical in every instance. Dominic frowned. That proves imitation? No. Her voice sharpened. It proves mechanical tracing. The Duke's eyes narrowed with interest. Continue. A real signature always varies slightly. She pointed to a magnified section. But these do not. Dominic leaned closer. Every line is identical. Yes. And the ink? Different composition. The Duke nodded slowly. So the signatures were rewritten later. Exactly. Dominic exhaled slowly. Which means my father's name was inserted after the investigation. Yes. Silence filled the carriage. Then the Duke said quietly, and you believe Sir Edmund Graves did it? He had access. He also had motive, Dominic added grimly. Isabel looked between them. But we still need direct proof. The Duke's gaze darkened slightly. That is why I brought you here. An hour later they stood inside the Duke's private study. Tall windows filled the room with pale daylight. Documents covered the desk. Isabel examined them carefully. Authentic signatures from Sir Edmund Graves. Her pulse quickened. This is exactly what we needed. Dominic watched her closely. Can you confirm it? Yes. She picked up a magnifying lens. The stroke pressure here. She pointed. Noticed the small fracture in the ink. Dominic leaned closer. A metal pen. Yes. The same instrument used on the forged documents. The Duke folded his arms, meaning Graves copied your father's signature and used Henry Carstairs as a scapegoat. Dominic's jaw tightened. For years. The Duke's expression hardened. Then we will end it. How? Isabel asked. The Duke's answer came quietly. With a trap. 3 nights later, the trap was ready. The Duke deliberately allowed word to reach Sir Edmund Graves. A rumor, an investigation reopening the East India records. Predictably, Graves panicked. And that night, he entered the Duke's library. Dominic and Isabel watched from behind the towering shelves. The room remained dark except for moonlight through the tall windows. Graves moved quickly, straight toward the hidden compartment behind the books. His hands trembled as he searched. Where are they? He muttered. Dominic stepped forward from the shadows. Looking for these? The lamps ignited instantly. Graves froze. The Duke appeared at the doorway with 2 ministry officers. The forged documents lay across the desk. Graves paled. Your Grace, I was merely breaking into my house, the Duke finished calmly. Graves's voice shook. I can explain. Please do. Dominic's voice cut through the room. He threw several pages onto the table. Handwriting comparisons, ink analysis, pattern diagrams drawn by Isabel. Graves stared at them in horror. This proves nothing. Isabel stepped forward. Yes, it does. Her voice was steady. Every forged signature carries the same pressure mark. She pointed to the evidence. And that mark comes from a double-pointed metal pen. Graves's hands trembled violently. Dominic's voice hardened. You used my father's name to hide your theft. The Duke added quietly, and when Thomas Fairmont discovered it, Graves's composure collapsed. He shouldn't have looked, he shouted. The room fell silent. Dominic's eyes turned cold. So you destroyed him? I had debts, Graves snapped desperately. I needed the money. And innocent men were convenient scapegoats, the Duke finished. The officers stepped forward. Sir Edmund Graves, one said formally. You are under arrest. The handcuffs closed around his wrists. Graves sagged. Before being taken away, he looked once at Isabel. Your father was too honest. he muttered bitterly. In this world that is dangerous. Isabel's reply was quiet. No. Her eyes were steady. Men like you are dangerous. The officers dragged Graves away. The library fell silent again. For a long moment no one moved. Then Isabel's legs suddenly weakened. Dominic caught her instantly. It's over, he murmured. Tears filled her eyes. My father. He was innocent. Dominic brushed a tear from her cheek. And the world will know. The Duke approached them. The ministry will publish the truth within days. Isabel nodded slowly. For the first time in 5 years, the weight on her chest began to lift. But as Dominic held her close, another realization stirred quietly between them. Something neither of them had yet dared to name, and soon they would have to face it. London adored redemption almost as much as it adored scandal. Within a week, every newspaper in the capital carried the same headline. Fraud in the East India Company exposed. Sir Edmund Graves had been arrested, the forged documents uncovered, and 2 names, once ruined, were publicly restored. Thomas Fairmont, Henry Carstairs. The truth spread through drawing rooms and clubs with breathtaking speed. Men who had once whispered accusations now spoke with admiration. Ladies who had once pitied the disgraced mathematician now praised his brilliant daughter. Society had changed its mind, as it always did. But Isabel Fairmont no longer belonged to that world, not as a governess. After the scandal, Lady Harrington had politely explained that the household required less attention from the public eye, which meant Isabel had quietly left Harrington House. Now she lived in Bloomsbury with Aunt Margaret. A smaller life, a quieter life. Yet for the first time in years, it was a life she chose herself. That afternoon the sun warmed the small garden outside the townhouse. Isabel sat beneath the climbing roses reading one of her father's old mathematics journals. Peace felt unfamiliar, but welcome. Then Aunt Margaret appeared in the doorway.
My dear.
Yes? There's a gentleman here to see you. Isabel closed the book slowly. A gentleman? A very determined one. Her aunt smiled slightly. He insisted as a matter of great importance. Isabel already knew. Is his name Dominic? Her aunt blinked. Yes, actually. A small laugh escaped Isabel. Please let him in. Dominic Carstairs entered the small parlor moments later. He looked strangely nervous. Not the confident aristocrat London knew. Not the sharp-minded spy she had worked beside. Just Dominic, holding his hat in both hands like a schoolboy awaiting judgment. Miss Fairmont. Viscount. For a moment neither spoke. Then Isabel gestured toward the sofa. You look as though you are about to face a duel. Dominic laughed quietly. Possibly worse. He sat beside her. I spoke with your aunt. You did? Yes. And? She informed me that if I intended to ruin your peace again. He hesitated. I must first prove my intentions are honorable. Isabel's lips curved. She is very protective. As she should be. Dominic inhaled slowly. Then he stood. Before Isabel could react, he dropped to one knee. Her breath caught. Dominic! I know the proper order of things was already ruined by espionage and political conspiracies, he said quietly. But I would like to correct at least one mistake. He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a delicate gold ring. Miss Isabel Fairmont. His voice softened. Will you allow me to court you properly? The question hung in the quiet room. From the kitchen, a teacup clattered loudly. Aunt Margaret was clearly listening. Isabel's eyes filled with warmth. You wish to court me? Yes. Walks in the park? Yes. Awkward tea visits supervised by my aunt? Yes. Flowers? Many. She tilted her head slightly. And if I refuse? Dominic smiled. Then I will return tomorrow and ask again. Her laughter slipped out before she could stop it. You are impossible. Yes. And stubborn. I learned from the best. Their eyes met. All the danger, all the secrets, all the nights deciphering codes beside candlelight. They were still there between them, but now something else had grown stronger. Trust, and something far more dangerous. Love. Finally, Isabel said softly, You may court me. Dominic exhaled in relief, but she added quickly. He froze. Yes? You must promise something first. Anything. She leaned closer. Never lie to me. His answer came instantly. Never. She studied him for a moment, then slipped the ring onto her finger. The small gold band caught the afternoon sunlight. Dominic looked at it as if it were the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. Does this mean I may return tomorrow? Yes. And the day after? Yes. And the day after that? Isabel laughed. I suspect you intend never to leave. That is correct. He reached for her hand, then paused. May I? She nodded. Dominic lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. From the kitchen came a very emotional sniff. Aunt Margaret. Dominic grinned. I believe your aunt approves. Very much. He stood and helped Isabel to her feet. For a moment they simply looked at one another. Two people who had nearly become enemies. Two people who had almost lost each other to secrets and suspicion. And yet, somehow, they had chosen the same side. Dominic brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. You know something amusing? He said quietly. What? The night you slapped the Duke of Harrington? Yes? I thought you were the most dangerous woman in England. Isabel smiled. And now? His voice softened. Now I know you are. He kissed her gently. Not hurried, not reckless, but certain. Outside the window, London continued its endless gossip and ambition. But inside the small Bloomsbury house, something far more powerful had begun. Not scandal, not secrets, just two stubborn hearts, choosing each other, and choosing it again. Every day that followed,